They had been told America was weak, soft, a nation of factories run by women and boys, a place too comfortable to fight a real war. For years, German soldiers heard this whispered in barracks, shouted in training camps, and repeated in propaganda broadcasts. But when the first wave of German POW stepped off the ship into the glaring sunlight of the United States, many felt something they had not expected: fear. Not fear of cruelty, fear of possibility, fear of a country far more powerful than they had ever imagined. The journey had already been surreal. Many had crossed the Atlantic with their eyes still full of smoke from North Africa, or the fields of Normandy, or the shattered cities of Italy. They expected to land in a grim prison island or some desolate wasteland. Instead, the Atlantic breeze turned warm, and the port before them looked alive. Giant cranes towered over them like metal giants, moving in perfect rhythm. Conveyor belts, trains, trucks, forklifts, every machine seemed in motion. One POW whispered, "My God, this is only one harbour." The guards didn't push them or shout at them. They simply guided the Germans forward, almost politely, but the politeness made it worse. It made the prisoners look around, and when they looked, their expressions slowly changed. The docks stretched farther than their eyes could see, filled with cargo ships loading and unloading supplies as if the war was some distant inconvenience. Fresh tanks gleamed under the sun. Aircraft engines hung from cranes waiting for transport. Pallets of ammunition, more than some divisions in Europe ever saw, sat stacked like ordinary packages. A young POW, named Karl, felt his throat tighten. He had fought in Tunisia, where Rommel's Afrika Korps struggled for fuel, bullets, bread, anything. Here he saw mountains of supplies so enormous he felt dizzy. "We were defeated," he murmured to the man next to him. "We just didn't know it yet." Then came the train ride. The Germans boarded long lines of rail cars, expecting cramped misery. Instead, they sat in clean compartments, watching the American countryside roll by like a moving painting. Farms with tractors, real tractors, not horses, barns with shiny metal silos, roads smooth as polished stone, filled with cars moving in both directions. They passed factories that roared like giants' brick walls, shaking as smokestacks pumped out endless black clouds. Even late at night, windows glowed with the light of thousands working in shifts. One officer, Oberleutnant Becker, pressed his forehead to the cool glass and whispered, "They never sleep, their factories never sleep." He had commanded a logistics unit during the invasion of the Soviet Union. He remembered begging Berlin for truck parts, for replacement tires, for fuel drums that never arrived. And here he saw row after row of American trucks rolling fresh from assembly lines, ready to replace the last batch before those ones had even left the country. When they finally reached the camp, many prisoners felt dazed, like men who had walked into another world. The camp was fenced, guarded, and disciplined but clean, organized, efficient. There were barracks with intact roofs, kitchens that didn't smell of rot, medical tents with equipment some soldiers had never seen even in German hospitals. The guards spoke casually with each other, joking, relaxed. They were not starving. They were not exhausted. They were simply doing their jobs in a country untouched by war's destruction, a country overflowing with energy. That was the moment the psychological shock truly began. Karl watched American trucks pull into the camp with food deliveries that looked like shipments for an entire battalion. Fresh produce, canned goods, sacks of flour, meat still pink with cold. The Germans stared at the supplies as if they were looking at treasure. One POW whispered, "This is for us." The guard shrugged. For the weak. Back in Europe, German civilians stood in lines for hours to get stale bread. Here, prisoners of war were fed better than many German soldiers at the front. As days passed, the POW settled into routine roll call, work duties, meals. But the shock didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Every delivery truck, every newspaper, Every rumor about production numbers added another layer to the same terrifying realization. America's strength wasn't just military. It was industrial, endless, almost impossible to understand. Oberleutnant Becker began sketching rough estimates on scraps of paper. Tank production, steel output, aircraft numbers. His hands shook as he wrote. If these numbers are true, he muttered, Germany could fight for 10 more years and still lose. The camp commander gave the POW a simple assignment one day: help unload crates from incoming railcars. They expected wooden boxes of food or blankets, but as the doors opened, they froze. Inside were aircraft parts, hundreds of them, fresh from a factory that had produced more planes in a month than Germany could in 3. And as the Germans lifted the crates, they realized. The wood felt warm in their hands, the metal edges smooth and new. Every crate was labeled with a code, stamped with manufacturing dates so recent the ink seemed barely dry. The POW weren't looking at old stockpiles or leftovers. These were aircraft parts, produced days ago, parts built while their own factories in Germany lay in ruins, bombed night after night. Carl lifted a crate lid and stared at a gleaming engine component. He ran a finger across the polished steel, expecting roughness, but the finish was perfect, like something from a museum piece. How many of these do they make? He whispered. A guard overheard him and casually answered, hundreds a week, sometimes more, depends on demand. Hundreds a week. Carl felt something collapse inside him. He thought of German mechanics cannibalizing wrecked planes for spare parts, of pilots grounded because one ball bearing was missing. He remembered Luftwaffe officers rationing engine hours like gold. Here, he watched American workers unload parts as if they were just groceries. Becker approached another crate and froze. This one is already assembled, he murmured, and it was. An entire engine ready to mount on a fighter. He stared at it for a long time before whispering to himself, we were never fighting the American army. We were fighting their factories. Rumors began circulating in the camp. Rumors of shipyards launching a new vessel every few days, of tank plants running 3 shifts around the clock, of B-24 Liberators, rolling off assembly lines faster than the Luftwaffe could shoot them down. Some prisoners dismissed it as American boasting until they saw the newspapers. The camp allowed POW to read U.S. papers, and the numbers printed openly in black ink were staggering. One article bragged about aircraft production, tens of thousands in a single year. Another casually mentioned steel output, surpassing that of entire continents. A third reported that the U.S. had more people working in war factories than Germany had soldiers on the Eastern Front. At first, some POW laughed in disbelief. Then the statistics began to sink in. A young soldier named Matthias stared at a photo of a Detroit assembly line women in overalls building engines with practiced precision. They said American women were weak, he muttered. If this is weakness, then what are we? Work assignments changed every week. Some POW were sent to farms, where tractors plowed fields that stretched to the horizon. Others were assigned to lumber mills powered by massive machines that turned trees into planks in minutes. A few were sent to nearby towns to help clean public areas. These men returned with haunted expressions, because what they saw outside the camp walls was worse than any propaganda. Children well fed and laughing, streets full of cars, stores overflowing with goods, movie theaters, restaurants, families living without fear of air raids or shortages. No rubble, no starvation, no desperation. America looked untouched by the war, almost indifferent to it, as if it were only one large project among many. Matthias tried to explain it to a friend one night. Germany is fighting for survival. America is fighting for victory. Those are not the same thing. Then came the moment that broke Becker. A group of POW was taken to a steel mill to help with basic labor. They walked into a cathedral of fire-molten rivers glowing orange, sparks falling like stars. The scale was monstrous, the heat thundered through the air, every minute Steel ingots rolled out like bread from an oven. Becker watched with hollow eyes. How many mills like this? He asked the foreman. The American wiped sweat from his brow. This one of hundreds. Becker didn't speak for the rest of the day. At night, sitting on the edge of his bunk, he finally murmured to Karl, "Even if Germany had 10 more years, we could never match this." Karl nodded slowly. We were fighting a giant with endless hands. And with each passing week, the prisoners understood something their commanders had never dared admit. America's greatest weapon wasn't its soldiers, or its tanks, or its planes, though all were formidable. Its true power was its ability to build, to replace, to create faster than the Axis could destroy. It was the factory floor, not the battlefield, that sealed Germany's fate. And as the POW lay in their bunks at night, listening to the distant hum of American trains and the distant thunder of American industry, many realized a truth that chilled them deeper than any. Winter on the Eastern Front, the war had been lost long before they ever reached American soil.